Now consider log number 5618 by Ms. Sherrill. For what purposes does the gentlelady seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will please distribute the amendment without objection. The reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady for the purpose of explaining her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, across the country, women's reproductive freedoms are under attack. After the Supreme Court's MAGA majority overruled Roe, 19 states now outright ban or severely restrict abortion access. So my daughters have less freedoms than I did while growing up. And it's unthinkable to me that so many of our servicewomen are already serving with less rights than I had while in the Navy. They're being stationed in states like Texas or Florida without basic access to reproductive care. The fact that our military treatment facilities are only allowed to provide abortions in extremely limited circumstances is unacceptable and puts the health and well-being of our service members and their families at risk. The decision to get an abortion is deeply personal and should be made by a woman and her doctor, not by politicians. Our service members expect that they will receive the best possible health care, but our military health care providers can't even give them an abortion when their health is at risk. And we know that, quote, exceptions to abortion bans don't work. We see horrific stories on the news about women who were denied care that they were supposed to receive under an exception, often ending with the mother nearly losing her life. We have more than 100,000 active duty service members stationed in Texas. We've heard stories of a young woman who died after experiencing a tragic miscarriage at 17 weeks. After being faced with this devastating loss, her doctors delayed medically necessary and life-saving care because of the state's abortion ban. She died as a result of an infection she developed because that care was delayed, leaving behind a young daughter. In Georgia, another young woman experienced a rare complication with a medication abortion where her body did not expel all of the fetal tissue. When she sought out medical care, she waited 20 hours before doctors were able to operate because of the state's abortion ban. While she waited, her infection spread and her organs began to fail. Amber's care came too late and she died as a result of the infection, leaving behind a 6-year-old son. We ask our servicewomen to put their lives on the line for this country. They shouldn't have to risk their lives giving birth. But the fact remains that a woman should never need a so-called exception to get an abortion, and it shouldn't need to be an emergency before she can get care. It should be available as a decision she gets to make over her own body and her own life. My amendment would repeal the draconian ban on abortions within the military health system, allowing our service women and military families to have the freedom of access and the freedom to choose. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose this amendment. The amendment would repeal Section 1093 of Title 10, which would force American taxpayers, coerce American taxpayers, force them, including those with deeply held moral and religious objections, to fund elective abortions through the Department of Defense. This is unacceptable, it's deeply divisive, and it's completely inconsistent with our longstanding bipartisan agreement that we have had. The prohibition on federal funds for elective abortions has been the law of the land for over 40 years. It's also a longstanding provision, by the way, that the majority of Americans support. In January of this year, a Marist poll found that a majority of Americans oppose taxpayer dollars going towards abortion services. Again, this amendment violates the sanctity of life. It upends a long bipartisan agreement, and it goes against the majority of Americans' beliefs. The law is clear. DOD has no business funding or performing elective abortions with taxpayer resources. And I urge my colleagues to support life. I urge them to support common sense. And I urge them to oppose this amendment. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very, very proud to support this amendment, which builds on my bill. That's the March for Military Service Members Act. And I thank my colleague and my great friend, Representative Sherrill, for offering it today. I hope and I believe that this might be your last NDAA. This administration's attack on reproductive health care for our servicewomen is just another way to try to get women out of our military and to try to discourage other women to join. When you're a woman, you raise your hand and you swear an oath to the Constitution to protect and defend this nation. You go where you're needed. By the way, the same goes for men as well. You go where you are told to go. Our service members don't get to choose where they're stationed, and nor should they. And for many service women and many service family members who are also women and girls, that means going to states where basic reproductive health care is criminalized. I think that we can agree that service members and their families should, without question, be able to access health care on their own time and with their own resources. But this administration's attack on both reproductive health care and women in the military threatens to make even that impossible. I had my oldest child while I was in uniform. As a veteran now, I reflect back and ask myself, if I had happened to serve in Pete Hegseth's DOD today, would I feel comfortable? Would I feel safe with my obstetric and gynecological choices? And the answer, unconscionably, is maybe. I was stationed in Boston at that time. But what if I had been stationed in today's Texas, where my youngest daughter now lives? I would most definitely not feel supported or safe. So I ask my colleagues to support this amendment and to ensure that health care is available to our military and their families, to everyone, everywhere, every time, because they give their lives to protect us. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I strongly support this amendment. And as it was said, if you support life, if you support the life of our service members, then you should also support this amendment. As was so eloquently stated by the ranking member of the Military Personnel Subcommittee, America's service members don't get to choose their mission. Where they go, where they live, and what they do is up to the needs of the nation. And in return, we must ensure that our service members and their families have access to the high-quality health care that they need wherever they are stationed, the health care every single person deserves and we fight for here in Congress. We are not meeting that promise to our service members. In many states and in some countries where service members are stationed, they do not have full access to essential reproductive health care, including abortion, without having to travel hundreds of thousands of miles or thousands of miles in cases. Just in the United States, more than 2 million beneficiaries of the military health system live in the 12 states in America where abortion is prohibited or almost fully restricted. And RAND found that roughly 40% of women on active duty have either severely restricted access or no access to abortion care. Nearly 40% of military spouses say state abortion bans would make them less likely to recommend military service to others. States with restrictive abortion laws have higher rates of total maternal mortality. And while female service members put their bodies and lives on the lines each day in defense of the nation, we must not further put them in harm's way by denying them access to basic health care, which includes abortions. The restrictions that Congresswoman Sherrill's amendment would repeal prevent service members and their families from getting the health care that they need, and they interfere in the doctor-patient relationship. Everyone, including our military families, should have the freedom to make decisions about their bodies and their health care. The current policy is cruel. Access to health care is a sacrifice no one should be asked to make, especially those that are already sacrificing so much in defense of our freedoms and this country. It's long past time to repeal these restrictions and allow service members and their families the access to care that they 100% deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we just heard that women, the supposition was that women would be less likely to join the military because they can't have their abortions paid for by the American taxpayer. Readiness, therefore, would then be affected. And I think it's absolutely hyperbolic and ridiculous to say that this administration wants women it's going to discourage them to join the military or encourage them to leave if they're already in. So let's look at facts. In 2010, women made up approximately 15% of the military. Now it's it's 18%. It didn't go down, it wasn't static, it went up. And then for one of our colleagues to say that Texas is this state that's draconian and full of darkness. Well, people vote with their feet. New York State, population from 2010 to 2025, population went up 3%. California, it went up 6.7%. And in New Jersey, interestingly enough, it went up 7.9%. But in Texas, in that same time frame, it magically went up 28%. People vote with their feet. Texas strong. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's funny to me that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle keep talking about what is being forced on the American taxpayer, when the only thing being forced is women being forced to give birth. Restrictions and bans on abortion care don't match up with how things work. They deny basic rights, endanger people's health, and ignore their wishes. Everyone deserves bodily autonomy and the right to make decisions about their own bodies and their own futures. Some people aren't more worthy of that than others, and some people's abortions aren't more deserved than others. This is a right that should be freely exercised by anyone who needs it. And let's talk about facts, how things are actually happen. Rape and incest exceptions are rarely used, and that's because you have to prove and relive your trauma in order to do that. Most survivors don't actually report rape or incest to the police, often out of fear or shame or trauma, and often proving rape or incest to get abortion care means providing a police report, forcing survivors to navigate the legal system to qualify for care, a legal system that we all know does not work very quickly or necessarily equitably. Imagine being a young lieutenant in the military when you get raped by maybe someone you're serving with, or maybe even someone in your chain of command, which we know has happened. You are saying that she would not be able to get the abortion care she needs unless she reports to the very chain of command that maybe was part of her abuse? That is ridiculous and so demeaning of our servicewomen. And we've seen in recent years that the vague definition of what counts as a threat to the mother's life or health is incredibly dangerous. A 2024 ProPublica investigation found that at least 2 women, Amber Nicole Thurman and Candy Miller, died in Georgia after being denied medical care stemming from these abortion restrictions. And a separate study in a medical journal in 2024 found that many providers are preoccupied with the need to protect themselves from criminal liability and are increasingly hesitant to provide abortion care that their patients need. These exceptions aren't compassionate. They're not reasonable, and they're not a compromise. And I think it's very telling that every single member who's spoken in favor of this has been a man, and every single spoken against this has been a man, and every single person who's spoken in favor of it has been a woman. And it's okay if you don't understand how reproduction works, but why don't you defer policy judgments to those of us who do? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment so we can remove these dangerous exceptions, and I yield back.
Chair, gentlelady yields back. The chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cisneros.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am in full support of this amendment by my good friend, Representative Sherrill from New Jersey. When I was Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, we changed the DoD policy so that service members or their family members could travel to get reproductive health care if it was not allowed in a state where they were stationed. As proud as I was that we were able to do that and to update it and provide that to our service members, I still knew that it wasn't enough because they were not able to get the care that they needed where they were stationed, which they should be entitled to. You know, as a Californian, an individual from California can go and they can get the reproductive health care, they can get the abortion, they can get also, you know, IVF and other things too, right, that help them have a child as well. And it's unfair that that is not allowed and not available throughout the country, that they are not able to get the abortion. On the other side of the aisle here, or on the other side of the table here, I participated and testified in a personnel and readiness, or personnel subcommittee hearing on reproductive health care. And the stories that the women service members told was just so overwhelming about how important it was to be able to have that choice, to make that decision for themselves as to how they wanted to proceed with their life and how really transformative it was to their career. For some of them, it allowed them to make this decision and stay going with their career because they just were not at a point in their life where they were ready to have a child. So I am in full support of this amendment. I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this. Give women the choice of health care that they deserve and that they should have. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Whitesides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of Congressman Sherrill's amendment to repeal the restrictions placed on our service members seeking reproductive care. Let's be clear, we are living in a time when my daughter has fewer reproductive rights than her mother did. Most women in our armed services joined when Roe was the law of the land. We made them a promise that their rights would be protected. Now, with no control over where they are stationed, we are threatening their basic fairness and freedom. No one who signs up to serve our country should be denied access to essential health care, especially not because of where they are stationed. Right now, nearly half of American servicewomen live in states that restrict abortion care. Women in uniform are being forced to navigate a patchwork of state laws as well as their chain of command that often ignore their sacrifice and strip away their autonomy. That's unacceptable. Reproductive care, including abortion, is health care, and denying it puts lives and careers at risk. Our service members do not lose their rights when they put on the uniform. This amendment would restore their dignity, respects their service, and affirms that the government should not interfere with private medical decisions. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and stand up for the many women who defend our freedoms every day. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anybody else wish to speak on Ms. Sherrill's amendment? Hearing none, there's no further debate. The amendment on the amendment offered by Ms. Sherrill. So many as in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Would you like a recorded vote? Recorded votes requested. Recorded vote will be postponed.